and you don't live around here. You moved away one day, so they say, from Harlem. Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, another edition with Dave, Lena, and Stu, where we talk about tech and its impact on the community and hopefully give you some insights and knowledge that will improve your life. Welcome, Lena Marvin. How are you today?
I'm very well. And yourself?
I'm good. Welcome, Dave Bernstein.
Hello. I have some unbelievable things to say about 5G if we have time.
Oh, okay. Well, we certainly will. I just wanted to talk about some of the things in the news, kind of top of mind before we get into the heavy tech stuff. And, it has to do with something we've talked about a lot, and that is, the advertising and the hate speech on social media. In particular, the new thing that's happening just in the last couple of weeks is because of the Black Lives Matters movement and all of the protests following the George Floyd murder. We've seen a flock of advertisers starting to respond positively. In particular, a bunch of advertisers have pulled out of Facebook. Some, really Fortune 500 guys, Adidas, Coca-Cola, Ford, Starbucks, Unilever, Pfizer, Puma, and many others. Even though, the analysts say, well, it's going to be difficult to make an impact on their cash flow bottom line because they have something, this is Facebook now in particular, something like 6 million advertisers. And even the top 100 of their advertisers only account for like 6% of their revenue. So one advertiser goes and another one comes in. But what I found interesting here, and Lena, you might have some insight, is their stock price dropped 8%. That's pretty significant. Just in terms of the, the public relations aspect of some of the hate speech and negativity that's going on, both from our leadership in the White House as well as from some of his white supremacist folks on the ground. Anyway, I wonder what your take is, Lena. Do you think this is going to have any kind of significant effect?
Well, I think some effect is already hitting, but part of what I found interesting when you brought these issues up over email before the show is I hadn't actually run into stophateforprofit.org before. And I think they're lovely.
Okay. Tell us about it. I haven't really have you looked at it and tell us?
So I haven't looked at it in too much depth, but if you go to the website, it's oriented around the idea that businesses the businesses have a role in stopping hate speech, and that's what this push from advertisers pulling out is about. It's not about government censorship, which I figure Dave would approve, but rather it's saying let advertisers stand against hate, and it's your profits will never be worth promoting hate, bigotry, racism, anti-Semitism, and violence is part of their message, and they've put out this series of steps to Facebook for addressing hate, and it's establishing and empowering permanent civil rights infrastructure, suggesting that they need C-suite level executives with civil rights experience to actually evaluate the policies and for discrimination and biases and hate. And that's like number one. And I'm like, yeah, get some suits who know what's going on. Number two was submitting to regular third-party independent audits and having a transparency report, which is not something Facebook is keen on doing, because Facebook, and they should be, because if people want to have, if Facebook wants a renewed trust from their user base, then that sort of transparency report would be quite helpful. Providing audits and refunding to advertisers who ads were shown next to content that was removed for violations of terms of service. That particular profit motive, that suggestion, I think is just great. So all of that is falling under this heading of accountability. And I'm just looking at this and I'm like, yes, 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 I quite like this. I like the shape of how they are trying to get this done, because they're not just, so they have it also from the business point of view, stop hate for profit, this business point of view, and a consumer's how to demand change. So it's this very, it's this just engaging thing. And it's kind of, it reminds me a little bit of the changetheterms.org, which is also about reducing hate online. And part of it is just, in your terms of service, say white supremacy is not acceptable. So you can just kick them out. And that seems like a really business-oriented, non-governmental control of ways to engage. So I would say that between changetheterms.org and well, I don't, and stophateforprofit.org. There's some really, it's highlighting some really great movements that have been online for a while that are now in this time of great unrest, or whatever you want to call it. It's really nice to see how some of these are pushing through. So that notion of changing terms is it's under the notions of decency, where you can start stemming radicalization and hate on your platform. So I thought it was, I think that they're great. And it's just this, like, the Stop for Hate list is this simple 10-item list where the first 3 are like, get suits who know what's going on, have transparency, and then with decency, creating internal mechanisms to automatically flag hateful content in private groups for human review is a neat one, because private groups are not just small gatherings of friends. They can have hundreds or thousands of people in them. So I thought it was great. It also engaged with how to do some counter harassment stuff on platforms, because people forget that it's not just a tool where people talk to each other. It's a place where people bully each other, where people are racist, where people suck. And saying that this is unacceptable behavior is really nice. Yeah. So
that's very refreshing to hear that being promoted and suggested, that these platforms have a value system that gets propagated through their terms of service and requires decency, and that they define that really specifically. Go ahead.
The other thing I like about the stophateforprofit.org is you can actually get a list of people who are, who have responded positively, like companies that have responded positively. So you can look at this list and you can be like, this is pretty long. People are getting on board. And it's not just the people I would expect. Like I would expect Mozilla to just get on board. But there's other folks on there who I'm like, oh, interesting. You have kind of a shady past yourself. I'm not sure I'd assume you'd be on this list. But they're on it none the same, because they don't, maybe I don't fully agree with all of their practices. Like their list of recommendations is definitely not whatever. Is not a list of people of companies that I would endorse, but it's interesting to look at the list nonetheless. Yeah, but
and hopefully some of that stuff will propagate through to the algorithms as well. Because it's they often point to the algorithm. Oh, the algorithm made some mistake, some error, and
if you set it up
or block this.
Algorithms are made by humans,
yes,
directly or indirectly. That's not saying anything.
So one of the things I think it's saying is a lot of people pretend that an algorithm is math and math is true, and that you don't bring biases into it. But I absolutely agree. Biases exist in algorithms. Algorithms are developed by people. The point in that in their discussion that I thought was really great is a money point, which is if you show an ad for my company next to something that turns out violated the terms of service, then you need to give me my money back. Like that particular thing, I think could impact how the algorithm is designed. I think it could impact, because that would hurt your bottom line.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You know, I had a friend, a fellow broadcaster, who was doing a show on Juneteenth and streaming a bunch of Juneteenth celebrations from around the country on his Facebook channel, and Facebook blocked him. Facebook told him it was inappropriate. You got some inappropriate message, and they shut him down. And you know, he said there was no inflammatory stuff, no controversial stuff, just, you know, the routine celebratory stuff for Juneteenth. So, you know, you got to wonder who the heck is in charge of the decency code, who's making those algorithms. And go ahead.
Well, I'm pretty sure all it would take to get a page like that in trouble is racists who go, no, this is offensive, I'm offended. And that it's somewhat due to abuse of flagging technology. So it may or may not
tell me
be
about that.
automated.
I don't know about the flagging on social media. Tell me, how does that work?
So sometimes if you're on Facebook, there's often an option where you can click like block this person or block this content or don't show me these ads. Like it's buried a little bit, but it's in there. And you can have people who will say this is inappropriate content about something that isn't inappropriate because they're a bad person, or they have a political agenda, or their notions of what is bad are very different from other populations. So in philosophy, there's this notion of cultural relativism where it's like, well, in this culture, it's okay. And in this culture, it's not okay. And should this culture get to tell this culture what to do? I am not a relativist. So I think that whoever I agree with is probably right. That's not a helpful way to defeat the philosophy problem of what is cultural relativism. But I think if you start building certain things into your terms of service and you can point to you're a white nationalist, I'm not supporting you in this space, like that's just enough that I can kick you out. There are folks who would say that's the right of the platform to say that, and there are other folks who would say that that's censorship.
So let me just understand.
It is censorship,
how
but censorship can be a good thing.
Well, you know, that's part of what we're talking about. I think there should be some terms of service that relate to decency and hate speech and destructive conversation that should be prohibited. I mean, and if that's what you're saying, Dave, I would agree with you. But I just wanted to ask Lena, so if a hate group decided, a white supremacist group decided, let's go on all of the Juneteenth streaming platforms that we can find and red flag it, would then the platform respond to that, or would the platform's algorithm respond to that and potentially shut down that Juneteenth?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So it doesn't always work this way. Different platforms work differently. I don't know how the behind the scenes part of Facebook works, but if I'm on Facebook and I have a friend's post or somebody's post is sitting in front of me, there's the who wrote it, how long ago it was, and then the content. Up across from their picture and their name over to the other side, there's 3 little dots. Oftentimes, those 3 little dots used in user interfaces quite often to find more information. You click that and you get things like save this post, hide this post, snooze this person, hide everything from this person. And then there's more drop down, and then there's why am I seeing this? Or find support or report post. And it has this little note under it that says, I'm concerned about this post. So if I do that, if I click, I'm concerned about this post, they have a number of items I can choose. Now this is on Facebook. I can choose nudity, violence, harassment, suicide or self-injury, false news, spam, unauthorized sales, hate speech, terrorism, voter interference, or something else. All of those are options. Now, one thing that's a weird little trick is nudity is probably going to be taken the most seriously, the most quickly, because of how American notions of nudity or obscenity, how those can land. So people might not even say that this is violent or this is terrorism. They might just be like, it's nudity to try and get something taken down.
Wow. So Dave, I mean, yeah, I know you've got some strong feelings about censorship on these platforms. How do you weigh in on what you see going on today?
I don't have anything to say about censorship. I haven't said before, and you've probably said better. But I can tell you a few things about what's going on that are directly relevant. Facebook may have gone down 8%, which is $50 billion. It went back up 5% today. That's only $30 billion. It has gone up 75% since March. That's 250 billion. And it's just about at the highest point it's ever been. So the people with money to put behind them thinks that all these things about Facebook are not going anywhere. I don't know. Second thing, to think of Facebook. Remember, they've hired some of the most influential public figures on earth. Clegg was a head of the British Liberal Party, or could have become prime minister. He's leading them internationally. Kevin Martin was the head of the US FCC. He's got a prime role. A good friend of, I think ours, I think you got to know him. Robert Pepper, when he was at the FCC, was the most influential regulator on earth. He's now working for Facebook.
Wow.
And they have slews and slews of people like that doing their best to present Facebook in their best light. What that means to me is that whatever you read about Facebook, half the time it's going to be wrong because they've hired some of the best liars on earth. Excuse me, let me not call them liars. Let me call them advocates. And people like Pepper and Martin actually have very high standards, and they're capable enough to get things done without abusing the truth. That's what I can tell you about Facebook. The British government has just said they have to come up with new antitrust policies to do something about Google and Facebook. As you can imagine, that hasn't gotten very far yet, but that is an official government paper, came out yesterday.
Wow. I mean, a juggernaut is really understates just the power and breadth and scope of Facebook. They really are incredible in terms of what they're doing out there and their power to move opinion and thinking across the planet. I'm wondering though, Dave, you said that the stock price has gone up 75% since, I don't know if it's coincidence or not, but since the COVID epidemic hit here in the US. I'm wondering whether or not that has had something to do with it, and whether other social media platform stock prices have risen as well. And for that matter, media in general, is that something that you can comment on at all, Dave? I know that
I made a mistake. It's only gone up 50%. It's only gone up 50%.
Okay, still that's huge. That's huge.
And it's really amazing. The stock market had one of its best quarters in history. The second quarter, the United States stock market went up 20% in the middle of the pandemic, which says to me, some people are saying, oh, the people investing don't know what they're doing. They're going crazy. This is going to be tulip bulb time. But to me, it says that what's happened is that our government has moved so much money to the major corporations that they will do fine in the pandemic, unlike everybody else. That the trillion something that's been thrown at the corporations is so much that maybe the companies will do fine. I think they're wrong, but I don't really have depth at that level of the economy.
Mm. I'm wondering, just kind of reacting to that statement, Dave, I'm wondering to what degree consumer attitudes and consumer spending affects the market these days. I'm not sure how large a segment of the market the consumer spending is. I remember back when the 9/11 occurred, and the president was encouraging people to go shopping, go back to the malls because folks were staying home, and there was a huge drop in consumer spending. The markets were taking a hit, and there was a grave concern that the big drop in consumer spending was going to have a negative impact on the economy. I'm wondering whether that is still the case, or are these corporations able to buy and sell and trade with each other and with governments, and the consumer spending is not so big a factor anymore. Can you comment on that, Dave? Or Lena?
Well, that's what we learned back when we were studying economics a long time ago. That's what most people
eons ago.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. That's what most people, most economists think. So what I'm saying is that apparently that the negative effect of the reduced consumer spending, investors by and large think is more than made up with by the transfer of wealth by the government. That is something that has not happened on that scale anytime I can think of in American history. It's that big the last few years. But the good news is have you watched the polls lately?
Just a couple of big ones that get trumpeted in the headlines relative to the president and his prospects not looking so good.
Well, even he seems to be thinking it's not looking so good, and talking about how the election is going to be stolen from him is what he seems to expect. Well, it's really frightening, because that would mean he only has another 6 months, and he's going to try to do more in the next 6 months if that's all he has, which makes it really, really important to do something politically, and especially in the Senate. Oh, yeah, you see Hamilton is about to be on the air? Speaking of revolutions and doing things politically?
I think that the new Disney Channel is about to run that. Is that right?
Yes. Day after, tomorrow or the day after, Miranda's Hamilton, which was the greatest success in the last 15 years on Broadway, and sees itself as a revolutionary play. And remember, Hamilton was part of the American Revolution, which admittedly we lost to people like him, but that's another discussion. And it's really—
he was also African American.
It was lost by those who fought it who were not wealthy. And if you look at history, you'll see things in the 1790s, like the Whiskey Rebellion, where it clearly was going to class, and Hamilton clearly had become of the upper class, and that was what he represented by the time of his death, although not during the war. And how many slaves did George Washington have? The last number I saw was over 200. Wow. And of course, we know what Thomas Jefferson did with his slaves. Their descendants are with us today, proven by DNA.
Yeah.
So
you look around today, anybody named Washington, 9 out of 10 of them are people of color.
Because, well, one of the good things that's hurting Trump is there are now a lot of people calling themselves Lincoln Republicans. And remember that Lincoln didn't fight the Civil War on the right side, although it did take a while to get him to oppose slavery. But I'm thinking maybe we should set up a Lincoln Republican Party here, right here in New York. Take the
That
party
would.
over, like the conservatives did years ago.
That'd be interesting. Just 1 second, guys. It is the bottom of the hour, and I just want to remind our viewers and our listeners that we are broadcasting and streaming live on WHCR 90.3 FM here in Harlem, the voice of Harlem, community radio, non-commercial, bringing you honest, open opinion and some fact as well, but a lot of our opinion about what's going on. And Dave, you were talking about Hamilton coming, and I just want to, before we lose that thought, I want to let our viewers know that's going to be that Disney Channel. Is that a new channel, Disney Plus, or is that something that's been around?
That's going to be on the
How
Disney
can viewers
Plus,
find that?
which is about $8 a month. And if you don't
Okay.
want to spend the $8 a month, I'm sure it's going to be on all the usual pirate sites, which is a kindness to those who don't have much money to buy the incredibly expensive channels that are getting out there.
Yeah.
You buy HBO and Netflix and Disney and a couple of others, and suddenly you're spending over $100 a month.
It's crazy. Not to mention your internet and your phone bill on top of that. But you know, even crazier was the pricing on Broadway to go see that play. And you know, $8 is not bad compared to what it cost, you know, 6-9 months ago to go see Hamilton on Broadway. You can spend a couple $100 on a ticket, and if you want to take your whole family, forget about it. So
they did have a limited number going out by lottery in lines at a reasonable price, so they did make the token gesture, and it was much cheaper if you saw it when it was at the public theater before it hit Broadway. But Broadway is so expensive, I didn't even think of going to it.
yeah. And interestingly, they just announced that closed until next year now, Broadway. They just shut down until 2021.
I think I heard Lena coming in.
I caught Hamilton when it was on YouTube for a bit. There was a moment
really?
where it was like released on YouTube, a video of the stage play as part of the, oh, everybody's stuck at home for COVID, so be happy, here's some content. But then it disappeared again.
Wow.
Yeah.
So did you see the whole show, Alina, the whole production?
Yep.
Care to comment? Give us your feedback. I still haven't seen it.
Very catchy. I think the most interesting thing about Hamilton for me when I lived in New York is right near where WHCR's studio is the Hamilton Grange, where you can go and see the house he lived at. I ended up meeting a historian who is farther uptown, who hates Hamilton and very enthusiastically explained why Hamilton's the worst. And it was just such a New York thing where there's this so I have incredibly fond feelings towards both the show, slightly less towards the historical figure, but it is interesting to see see it in a lens of New York history. And the Hamilton Grange house is quite fun. At one point, it's moved like 3 or 4 times on the Isle of Manhattan. It's always been in Harlem, but it was stuck between a church and an apartment building, and they lifted it up and they took it down the street and they dropped it in the park, and I got to watch while that happened. So
Yeah.
I always think of Hamilton in relation to his house.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, you know, before we leave the topic of social media and some of the crazy stuff that's going on, I just wanted to note that and get your guys' reaction to Trump's Twitch channel has been suspended. And Reddit banned some pro-Trump online groups as well. And, you know, I don't really know Twitch. I don't have a sense of how big a platform that is, but do you think that was significant that they made that move, banning the president?
Twitch is really big. It's owned by Amazon, which is owned by Jeff Bezos, who also owns the Washington Post. And Trump has made a very stupid move. They used to say never attack anybody who buys ink by the barrel. Well, the Washington Post doesn't buy that much ink anymore, but it still has a lot of influence. And attacking somebody, attacking the richest man on earth, Jeff Bezos, is maybe going to hurt him. He might even lose. Let's hope so.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting, Dave. You're just kind of pulling the curtain back, and I guess we all know, but you know, it's not always common knowledge that these media platforms, some of them are controlled by individuals, even though they may be public companies and traded on the stock exchange. You have individuals like Jeff Bezos, Zuckerberg. I'm not sure who there is at Google, but there may be a couple of really heavy cats at Google that can kind of make those calls in terms of going after or not going after particular folks. You know, I just wish that we'd see more folks in these boardrooms, back to your earlier point, Lena, stepping up to put some brakes on just some of this incredible stuff. I mean, Trump, they stopped counting how many lies the president has told. And, you know, his stoking of hate speech and hate groups, I mean, it's unbelievable. And to me, the media has really been complicit. And I'm really maybe now starting to talk a little bit about the television media and the cable TV media. And I'm wondering, Dave, whether or not you have any numbers on their stock and what's happened with them, not just for COVID, but since the Trump era. I imagine that their stock numbers have gone through the roof. But to me, they have been complicit in this whole Trump era, television media. And I'm wondering what you guys think about that.
Let's let Lena come first.
Yeah, Lena, go ahead.
Oh, it's so depressing. I hate it. I feel like part of it is just that the FCC doesn't hold, like, there's no mechanisms that are requiring news outlets to fact check anything. And the push of this, like, there's so much information and everyone's feeling a little overwhelmed by just how much information there is at all times, that there's been this push away from just things that are true to narratives that people tell, and who has the strongest narrative as opposed to what's true, which is exactly my brain going past the question into the deeper philosophic trouble. So I don't think I'm well responding to your statement. I'm just kind of overwhelmed by the lack of truth.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I went to Washington.
Go ahead, Dave. I was thinking about some of the actual people that are involved there, but maybe it's so much bigger than the people that are making the decisions and in the newsrooms and in the editorial boards of these various companies. Maybe it's bigger than them, and to your point, Lena, the money is just driving them towards whatever is selling to the audience, as opposed to, you know, what is meaningful and what does the country need to hear. Dave?
Well, I had a data point for you since you asked about the number. The Washington Post in April had counted 18,000 false or misleading claims in 1,170 days. That's their count on Trump. That's pretty impressive. But Tucker Carlson and what's his name? Hannity or Combs, which is the one who's still there? Sean Hannity, I think, had the highest ratings on cable television in the last week. So there's a whole lot of people who really don't care about the truth. And some of them work for the Washington Post, but that's a separate story.
So there's been an exodus away from ratings. Like, ratings aren't actually a good gauge of how many eyes there are on a particular thing. So that number is going to be a little skewed. Not that I'm disagreeing, just that when you hear this has the highest ratings on television, the number of eyes that television has dropped significantly, and keeping track of those numbers has always been a lot harder than people really gauge it for. So just to toss that out there. Not to disagree, but to contextualize.
What really frightens me is that Trump's ratings are all the way down, but 40%, 150, not quite 150 million Americans, 135 million Americans still support him, despite everything. That's one of the most frightening things in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Tell me when you want to talk about 5G. That's where I do know something.
Go ahead, Dave. I know you've been itching to get into it. So
tell me.
Yeah, what's going on in 5G? What in the heck's going on there, Dave?
Well, how much slower do you think US 5G is than decent 4G? We now have 10,000 data points that OpenSignal has put together.
You say how much slower is 5G than 4G?
What, you thought it was faster?
That's the hype.
OpenSignal, largest public database on testing phones, tests I don't know how many times a month. The US carrier is a little behind, but in Canada, the largest, Bell Canada, is averaging 67 megabits down on their 4G, and the second largest, TELUS, is 75 megabits down. They now have data on T-Mobile, AT&T, and Verizon, and what do you think the speeds are on the 5G in the US? They had over 10,000 tests. AT&T is 60 megabits, slower than Canadian 4G. Wow. T-Mobile is 49.2. Verizon is actually up there. They're using the good millimeter wave. It's almost 500 megabits, but it's available to less than 0.5% of the country, according to the latest test. And that was why so when I was quoting the Washington Post, I said, I'm getting really dubious because yesterday the Washington Post had a perfectly sensible article on new radio networks and so on, and said that 5G was so much faster. And it's amazing. We now have, I had these numbers over a year ago because I was talking to the engineers who were building this stuff. There just wasn't going to be great things happening. But now, even when we have the numbers, people still think that 5G is something great. That got me angry. So thank you for giving me the minute or two to tell you about that.
Well, yeah, you can take more than a minute, Dave. Is that why do we continue to hear that it's faster when it's not? Is that just the incredibly effective lobbying folks for the industry?
One of the best books I've read in the last few months, it's about 3 years old, but I hadn't seen it before, explains what's going on in a lot of things like this. It's called Narrative Economics. It's written by a Nobel Prize winner. And what he's saying is that we develop stories about things, and then we get attached to the stories. So his examples are things like Bitcoin, and of course, tulip bulbs, and loads of things in history. And I'm watching that in 5G, the story run around, and I know the people who are spreading them. I know them personally, many of them, that 5G was going to be great. And then they multiplied it. And later this month, the head of the FCC is going to come to the Internet Society Forum and say 5G is really good. And I hope somebody asks him the question I just asked you. How much slower is it than decent 4G, this 5G that you're touting? But nobody will. It's Washington. And in Washington, I've watched how these lies happen. I've watched how, and some of them have become friends, how skilled the people creating the narratives that will persuade the head of the FCC to reduce the cost of loan companies because he wants 5G, because 5G is so great. The number that's always in my head is how many millions they pay to these storytellers. The highest number I found was David Cohn, Comcast tweet, 18 million a year. Jim Ciccone on AT&T, I had a number that he was making 9 million a year, and he told me it was slightly exaggerated. So maybe he was only making 5 million a year. For that kind of money, you get people who can persuade. And right now, I'm used to seeing it from AT&T and Comcast. And right now, I'm seeing more and more of that from Google and Facebook and Amazon, to the point that anything I read about those companies, I'm wondering how much they were influenced. That's unwelcome. But I said before, I'm preaching to the converted here. We know
well,
that
we know that, but our audience still needs to hear that, needs to know, that, I'm hesitant to use the term fake news because it's been so misused particularly by the president when he doesn't like what it says, what the news is reporting. But what we're talking about is manipulation of opinion by lobbyists who are paid by the corporations to do so. And maybe it's not quite as insidious when in the technology realm, although it certainly has been working to take money out of folks' pockets. I'm not sure that that's quite as insidious as the negative opinion forming, but still, you're talking about a whole phenomenon that has evolved. I don't know. I'm be interested in your perspective, Dave. You've been technology journalist for 20, maybe 30 years following this stuff. Has there been a qualitative shift in your mind in terms of the impact of lobbyists in terms of reporting? I know you know about technology. Maybe you can speak to that area, but I'm just wondering to what degree opinion is being shaped by money today, as contrast to maybe 20, 30 years ago.
There've always been good reporters, and there are a lot now. And there are more of them at the Times and the Washington Post than anywhere on earth. And I remember things like Saul Hansel bugging me twice a day for 2 weeks because I told him he made an error. And so did Carl Bode. And he said, okay, let me go research it. And he was asking me for data, who's a contact, who knows, who to call. I get one email from him at 1 a.m. and another at 7 a.m. And there's a lot of people like that. But there are a lot of people who are too lazy to go beyond what they hear. And as I say, it just made it into the Washington Post again. And I don't have any answers here. I can find the facts. I can be respected by a small group of people in a very small pond because I'm more likely to have the facts. And I can feel good about it. But I don't know how to solve the enormous amount of misreporting because a company like AT&T or Facebook or Google has $100 million a year budget to hire people to get their message across. And so few people can see through it. I wish it were better. Lena, you're an authority on getting information. I'm sorry?
The one thing that I'm encouraged by, is platforms like this right here, where you have folks that can tell it like it is and cut through some of the BS that we hear from the lobbyists And this is just one platform, but there are many others springing up. You know, I'm looking at the Black Lives Matters impact that it has had on American media and on thinking, at least to the degree to which we can kind of sense how the American public is thinking. And that's been the result of folks using, you know, this device right here to stream and document stuff that's going on out in the real world, unfiltered, unbiased. And the more voices you get, huh?
I'm not going to agree that it's unbiased.
I'm
Okay,
very
well,
biased.
everybody has an
I'm
opinion
very
and a
strong
perspective.
bias. But it's my job as a reporter to find the facts despite my bias. And I try to do it as well as I can.
I think it's much healthier to look at any media you are consuming and assume that it is being narrated. And it may be being narrated by someone who is trying to just tell the truth, but it's never the full picture. It's always going to be biased. There's always going to be context that's lost. Dave, you frequently will say, well, I'm preaching to the choir. And it's like, right, but we're the two people in the conversation with you. But the folks who are listening may not know what the background is. There's this missing level of context, which you then explain, and it overcomes that missing bit of information. But the idea of stuff is being, there are platforms that are unbiased, or there are people that are unbiased, I actually think is quite dangerous. I think it's a much better idea to look at anyone and everyone with the assumption they're trying to tell their story as best they understand it. And sometimes they're very bad people, and sometimes they are just trying to sell you things, or sometimes it is their genuine understanding, which doesn't make it true. Not that truth can't be known, but I think bias is always something to accept as part of life.
And we as media people have to really struggle against the biases that we have. And I do the best I can, but I'm not going to pretend I don't have them.
Yeah, I think to me, that is the key, is to be aware of them and to state them and to be open and honest about them. I agree with you, Alina. I've said for the longest that, you know, to me, there is no such thing as quote unquote objective reporting and objective opinion. Every opinion and every report comes from someone that has a subjective point of view. And I've never believed that a reporter can, or a media outlet can, pull themselves out of their context and report out of their context, because they can't. And that goes to people, that goes to organizations.
I totally disagree. I think that's the basic skill of a good reporter, including, in my case, talking about what the Republican schmuck at the FCC does right when he does it right.
But when you say schmuck, you're
That's a value.
I'm telling you, I'm biased against him.
Okay.
But when I see something he does right and I look at the facts, I'm going to do my best to report that he did a historically important job when he freed up all the spectrum around 6 gigahertz. That was a huge thing.
You are expressing that you think it is your job as a journalist to be unbiased. I'm actually saying that people who believe that they are streaming things in an unfiltered way are not doing that. There's no way to do it, and they lack the theoretical knowledge or the structures of how to overcome bias in their own unedited footage.
Well, I disagree with you, because I'm not trying to be unbiased. I'm willing to say I'm biased, and I'm going to call him a schmuck. That's what I believe. But my job
Dave,
is to.
I'm not talking about you, Dave.
It's not personal, Dave. Take yourself out.
I was talking about people who aren't journalists. You are a journalist. I am saying that people who
I'm just
aren't
mad at
journalists.
this lady at the Washington Post who 9 months ago I sent the data on 5G and didn't pay enough attention and just got it wrong again. And she quoted me a few times. She listened to me on some things. I'm sorry, I'm frustrated.
Well, so you are accepting criticism I have as others as criticism of you, And again, I'm just saying anybody with a camera or anybody with a camera phone or anyone who takes a picture of anything, there is some amount of agency and choice in how it's presented. And if you are not pushing against your own biases, as Dave is, good job, Dave, then you may not.
I sometimes fail, but it's what I got to do.
Continue,
No,
Lena.
beat up on me when I get it wrong.
So anywho, I am glad that the thing that I love about the current state of technology is so many more people have platforms. And one of the dangers is that's meant a radicalization and an increase in the number of racists who are in communication with each other. And that's been quite bad, but it's also meant a increase in the ability of folks who are fighting for things that I agree with being able to communicate. So it's kind of upped the ability of all sorts of groups to be able to communicate and send their message out into the world. So it's not that it's not an issue of bias for me, but kind of an issue of volume, and the just amount of stuff that is out there has been really interesting.
Well, this is a great conversation, guys, and I would like to carry it on and pick it up in another show because I think these alternate voices and this new media that we have that so many folks are employing is really important to understand and to exploit in ways that empower and uplift. But we're out of time. So I want to thank you guys. Thanks, Lena. Thanks, Dave. Great show today. You've been listening to Community and Technology on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. Stay tuned for, I'm not sure what's coming up next. It may be Brother Perez and Harlem Jazz. But in any event, thanks for tuning in. See you next week.
Langston Hughes, he don't live round here. He moved away one day from his way here in Harlem. I know that Marvin Gaye used to play right here. Somebody say you can't keep me away from where I was born.